Askreddit Asks, serious history is full of well-documented human atrocities, but what are the stories about when large groups of people or societies did incredibly nice things? The Quakers boycotted products of slave labor. Imagine trying to avoid cotton. Oh, I got silver. Fancy me.
The Quakers are also one of the only religions that existed in the British colonies, perhaps elsewhere but I don't know for sure, that allowed women to have a say in the organization. The idea was that every human contains a piece of God. So everyone should be treated equally. Wow. Thanks for the upvotes everyone. Who would have thought that my top comment ever would come from my semi-obscure Quaker knowledge?
In 1859, an insane homeless man from San Francisco named Joshua Norton proclaimed himself Emperor of the United States, and the people of San Francisco went along with it. He was widely beloved, treated with great deference, and the currency he created himself was honored at the establishments he frequented. When he died, 10,000 people went to his funeral, and he is either referenced by or inspired characters in works by Mark Twain, Robert Louis Stevenson, Christopher Moore, Morris and René Gasquini, Selma Lagerlof, and Neil Gaiman.
IIRC. A bunch of retired Japanese nuclear engineers came out of retirement and volunteered to do the work in the reactor building following the tsunami disaster at Fukushima Daiichi. Knowing they'd receive a likely lethal dose of radiation. But they didn't want a younger generation who had more life expectancy to do it. I did not recall correctly. As has been pointed out, it was not a likely lethal dose of radiation, but more like a likely cancer 5 to 10 years down the line inducing exposure to radiation. It had the possibility of being lethal if something went wrong. The tsunami killed far more people and left millions homeless was the true disaster.
I remember that being on TV. The enormous sense of duty they felt towards the younger generation. It was a humbling thing to witness. Even on TV.
Because of 9/11, 38 jetliners had to land in a small Canadian town. 500 were stranded in a town of only 10,000. That town basically took care of all the people. There was a book about it called The Day the World Came to Town. But really it was more than a day. It was like a week or so.
As a little thank you, Lufthansa went against their naming conventions to only give new airplanes the names of German cities or states and called one, Gander, Halifax, https. C1. staticflickr.com/3/2287/22201918335_DB3EB44888D_B. JPG.
In Newfoundland, there's a musical about this called Come From Away. And it really shows the kindness that came out of 9/11. The Choctaw Native American tribe sent relief funds to Ireland during the Great Potato Famine. A remarkable act of generosity, especially considering that was shortly after the Choctaw had been displaced off their traditional land. Source. URL redacted.
Ireland has set up a scholarship to begin in autumn of URL redacted. News, Ireland, 2018, 0312, 946,719 Varadkar Brexit, as a form of thank you. It allows students of the Choctaw community to come to Ireland to study.
I wrote a whole documentary proposal about this so I could get funding, but it got turned down, so might as well share it with my Reddit fam. There was a research project in the 60s that wanted Japanese Americans men to volunteer for medical study to determine why Japanese men die of stroke while American men die of heart attack. The research team in Hawaii expected maybe 100. They actually got around 8,000. And not only they agreed to do a physical and answer all sorts of questions about diet and everything. They stuck with this program until they died. So roughly 8,000 men. Giving all this data and even donating their bodies after they died is a massive amount of data, and that can do amazing things. This data helped make breakthroughs in cholesterol, heart disease, a high blood pressure. It even helped discovered that there was pesticides in the milk in Hawaii in the 80s. Now, because there's so many brains they can examine, The team in Hawaii think they can finally figure out how to detect Parkinson's disease, and maybe find a cure. Even make breakthrough in dementia. Sorry if the info is not 100% doing it from memory and it's late here. URL redacted.
After the 2011 Christchurch earthquake hit us here in New Zealand, relief came. UN requested and unconditionally. From all over the world. From our brother nation Australia, we love you, ya cunts. The UK, the USA, the European Union, Canada, Japan. Every day on the news was a new story about rescue workers from Mexico touching down and getting to work, or a significant donation of relief money coming in from Australia. Or a statement from the Pope, the Queen, Barack Obama reaching out and offering comfort. It was an overwhelming gesture of international support. To this day, that's what I remember most about the earthquake. As a Kiwi, not the destruction or the people we lost there, but the way the world showed up on our doorstep ready to help.
You lot are some good eggs. You completely deserve the kindness, an Aussie cunt.
This one is pretty well known, but it always warms my heart. The Christmas truce of URL redacted, wiki Christmas_truce. When soldiers all along the Western Front called for a temporary ceasefire on Christmas Eve. Soldiers on opposing sides screamed, sang Christmas carols from their respective trenches, and even started scurrying across no man's land to give each other small gifts. They shared food, cigars, stories, and even played football together. In the middle of one of the most violent wars we've ever known.
I love and hate this. The soldiers got to treat the other side as human for a day. Sharing and playing with them. Then had to go back to killing them. For me it would be twice as hard the next day, knowing and remembering the day before was fun. War is hell indeed.
The Maasai tribe in Kenya gifted 14 cows, the highest form of wealth in that community, to the US after 9/11. What did we do with the cows? Of all the comments on here, this is the one that made me tear up. Thank you. In 1989, a man named Ian Kiernan got a bunch of people off their asses and outside to clean up Australia. 30 years on and it's still a massive annual event. Oh, and now worldwide. I remember that first time teenage me went out to my local beach to help, and the amount of McDonald's rubbish was shocking. Unfortunately it still is. But every year brings more people out to clean in their local areas. Ian died last October. Rest his clean soul.
Denmark banded together to evacuate their Jewish population during World War II. They estimate that 99% of the Danish Jewish population survived the war because of the collective effort. URL redacted, wiki rescue_of_the_Danish_Jews.
One of my favorite details of this story is that years later, when Israel was awarding the Righteous Among Nations recognition, basically the Medal of Honor for non-Jews during the Holocaust, to the Danish resistance, they insisted it only be awarded to the entire organization and not an individual. One of the names included in that award is the German diplomat who originally leaked the information the Danes. Edit. A word.
This is just one man, but his story has stuck with me ever since I heard it. In 1939, Maximilian Kolbe was arrested and later sent to Auschwitz. During his time there, all he did was help others, praying for the dying and comforting many. In 1941, after a prisoner from his block escaped, an SS officer arrived and announced that he would select 10 prisoners to be starved to death. And Kolbe was not among them. After hearing one of the men cry out for his wife and children, Kolbe volunteered to take the man's place. The officer agreed and Kolbe led prayers and sang with the other 10 prisoners until he was the last one left alive. He was executed by a phenol injection shortly afterwards.
Having a hard time finding the video of it. But Tom Morello did a benefit concert for immigrant Korean workers that moved to America because Gibson fired them all after they unionized at the factory in Seoul. But the day before the benefit show, the earthquake in Haiti happened. The fired factory workers voted to donate 100% of the proceeds to the Haiti Relief Fund. I'm sure there's a video somewhere. He explained the origin of Worldwide Rebel Song at a Google campus concert several years back.
Gibson as in the guitar manufacturer? That's appalling. I don't remember how long ago it was, but certainly around the time of the Arab Spring, when Egypt's Coptic Christian community was particularly vulnerable. A bomb planted by Islamic extremists exploded near a Copt church shortly before Christmas, which put the fear amongst the Copts that they were being targeted. Sure enough, on Christmas Day they arrived at the churches to find them surrounded by crowds of Muslim demonstrators, who then acted as human shields to protect them from more bombs. They knew that the extremists would be less likely to risk killing fellow Muslims. If my memory is not failing, the gesture was repeated by Coptics protecting large mosques on several occasions, since some of these were targeted by government security forces.
During the plague pandemic, the residents of the small village of URL redacted places, Am Plague Village, in the countryside of England, democratically decided to build a wall around the city, not to keep the plague out, but to avoid it spreading to the nearby cities. Supreme bravery and altruism, right there.
A severely deformed English man named Joseph Merrick, and known as the Elephant Man, was treated horribly for most of his younger years. Used as a circus freak show by different people, they covered him in a blanket and would take it off for people to see his disfigurements, who all robbed him blind and left him to die. He wound up in a hospital in London, where a doctor examined him and took care of him as best he could. The deformities were not painless. The hospital couldn't afford to take care of him, so the surgeon posted a letter in the London newsletter, telling Merrick's story and pleading for someone who would be willing to pay care for Merrick for the rest of his life. It was not expected to be long. A year later, the surgeon sent another letter to the newspaper, thanking the countless people that had sent money to the hospital, allowing them to care for Merrick until he passed. When I first read those two letters I bawled my eyes out. Edit. A few mistakes I made that should be corrected. The person who wrote the letters to the London Times was F.C. Cargom, the chairman of the hospital, not the surgeon Treves that had befriended Merrick. Treves had met him while he was doing exhibitions, not when he showed up at the hospital. The time between the first and second letters was 3.5 years. Not 1 year. Here is the link to the letters if anyone wants to read them themselves. URL redacted.
Shiuni Sugihara always gets me. Yeah, finding the bright sparks of hope in the Holocaust is kind of like, okay, but there really is a diamond in all of this fecal matter. But he was a badass dude. He was a little Japanese government official who looked at what Germany was doing and went, okay, not on my watch, fuckers, and then quietly just smuggled Jewish people out, giving them permits so they could get to safety, even when it would have been his head if he had been caught. He managed to get a fucking remarkable amount of people to safety, survived the war, was quietly sacked from his government job, and was later honored as one of the righteous among the nations. There is a beautiful statue of him in Little Tokyo in LA, sitting on a bench, offering out a visa with a URL redacted v twism 0u27z4 maxras default JPG, the same way he saved 558 Jews during the Holocaust. Also a hark, a vagrant comic. It's up to you which you consider to be the more awesome. URL redacted index PHP. It equals 144.
The city of San Francisco, and indeed, the whole world on Twitter, played along with URL redacted wiki Batkid back in 2013. Kid survived his cancer, too, so an all-around happy story.
Sounds like URL redacted.
Yes. Came to share Batkid. Glad I'm not the only one who thought of him.
At a time when Ireland was enduring the terrible loss of 1 million dead and the mass exodus of 1 million more during the Great Hunger. The story goes that the Ottoman Sultan, Khalifa Abdul Majid I, declared his intention to send £10,000 to aid Ireland's farmers. However, Queen Victoria intervened and requested that the Sultan send only £1 because she had sent only £2 herself, so the Sultan sent only the £1 but he also secretly sent 5 ships full of food. The English courts attempted to block the ships, But the food arrived in Drogheda harbor and was left there by Ottoman sailors. That £10,000 that the Sultan pledged to the Irish would be worth approximately £800. $1. 7 meters today. URL redacted.
That time Canada declared a hospital international territory for who would turn out to be Princess URL redacted, wiki, Princess Margaret of the Netherlands. Really cool fact. This happened in the 40s during World War II and was done for the Dutch royal family in exile. So that any child born in that hospital would only be Dutch, not Canadian, in order to prevent any problems that would arise from that later.
As thanks for this act, the Dutch traditionally send a crap ton of tulips over to Canada every year. There is a tulip, URL redacted, wiki, Canadian_tulip_festival as a result.
During the 1930s in the Soviet Union, there were a series of arrest campaigns that targeted various groups, party leaders, wealthier peasants, and certain national groups were particularly at risk. One day in the archive, I found a file of an engineer accused of industrial sabotage. That wasn't unusual, but what was a letter written and signed by over 100 other workers at the factory, which essentially was a character reference for the accused man. The letter was incredibly emotional. It was clear he was beloved by those who worked with him. Everyone who wrote and signed it took such a huge risk, opening themselves up to similar charges. But they did it anyway. And they did it so boldly. He was executed anyways. Only time I've had to leave the archive reading room to have a cry.
That's deep. Thanks for sharing that. Really.
1997. North Dakota, Minnesota. We had a shit of a winter, brutally cold. Snow up to the rooftops and in the spring. All that snow had to go somewhere. Except it didn't. Everything flooded. Countless people lost everything. Grand Forks, East Grand Forks, got hit the hardest, and when you thought it couldn't get worse. Buildings downtown caught fire, yup. Water up to the second floor. Top floors on fire. I have never seen people band together like during the flood. I was just a kid. But between sandbagging, cleanup, and getting lives back together, it was heartwarming. People were taking in families, and schools all over the place were making room for kids. Volunteers were everywhere for every step of the way. People put in the labor, donated food and clothing, gave money. Together the valley was rebuilt. It was insane watching everyone work together. Edit. Thanks for the silver. I love reading your memories about the flood. We went through it again in 2002 in Roseau. MN. Much smaller town but just as bad for flooding. It was awful. Roseau is my mom's hometown and she watched her childhood drown. There again, the community banded together to rebuild. And again in 2009 in Fargo. We were sandbagging in a blizzard. We worked so hard on this one house. The water was coming up so fast and we sandbagged our little hearts out. The water started coming under the pile and the firemen pulled us out of there. My heart broke for the family. But we just bussed to the next house and started over.
The story of the RMS, URL redacted, 8PJSRFG, is one of my favorites.
Wow, I never knew how hard the captain, crew, and passengers pushed to get there so quickly. I knew they were a while away, but I didn't realize that they sacrificed their own safety so much.
Oh, I love this. I was so worried the whole time reading it that despite everything, they weren't going to manage to save anyone. Definitely saved the picture to look at again later.
Society as a whole is getting better for people all the time. From the farmers getting up early to make sure there is abundant, URL redacted, food per person, to the healthcare workers reducing infant, URL redacted, child mortality. And educators teaching more and more, URL redacted, Human Development Index. Most people's jobs is to make things better. And most people work at that every day. Even when they are sad or bored. We look for and cheer the heroes like Baller or Salk. But the real progress is made a little bit each day in millions of little ways.
This is a beautiful perspective. Closing parenthesis.
The Great Race of URL Redacted, Wiki, 1925_serum_run_2_gnome. It is the winter of 1924 and there is only one doctor. Dr. Curtis Welch. In the small town of Nome, Alaska, weeks after the deaths of several children from what was originally misdiagnosed as tonsillitis, Dr. Welch confirms the presence of diphtheria in his hospital. By great misfortune, all of the hospital's diphtheria antitoxin had expired just after closure of the port. More would not come until spring. Fearing an epidemic and more fatalities, Welch pleads for assistance from the U.S. Public Health Service and NBSP. A meeting of the Board of Health determined that the only way to deliver the necessary amount of antitoxin and prevent a diphtheria epidemic was by dogsled relay. And NBSP, over a distance of over 1,000 kilometers. And NBSP, in the middle of the Alaskan winter. And NBSP, in under 6 days. And NBSP, in favorable conditions. This journey would normally take around 30 days. It had to be completed in 6. Or exposure would cause the antitoxin to expire and, as Dr. Welch had sadly discovered, expired antitoxin had no effect. With winds exceeding 40 km per hour, temperatures at or below -50 Celsius, and the low visibility from the polar URL redacted wiki polar_night, 20 men and dozens if not hundreds of dogs braved all of these conditions and, in exactly 6 days, successfully delivered 100% of the antitoxin. And NBSP, several of the men suffered severe frostbite and many of the dogs died on the journey. However, the epidemic was stopped and, depending on who you ask, saved thousands of lives by stopping the disease from spreading outside of Nome. URL redacted, wiki, operation_yellow_ribbon. Obviously this was after a tragedy, but what Canada did for the US planes after 9/11 was incredible and also inspired the play Come From Away.
I've never seen the musical, but Come From Away is one of my favorites. The soundtrack captures Newfoundland so well.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to support the channel, and above all, have an excellent day, you amazing people.